have it with me here. That's social convention.
Yes.
I know if I give him the person my business card, he would put it away afterwards, half an hour later.
Yeah.
It's just a symbol.
Yes, just a symbol. But they like this kind of symbols. Yeah.
So I have to prepare for an excuse.
Oh yeah. My fault. I had to say you that, but
I take it.
it was a surprise for me because I didn't know that he would be so upset with this kind of thing. I, it's a surprise. It's really a surprise.
Or I use another word. I say, I'm so well known, you don't need a card.
And he will say, "Oh, I am also so well one that I don't need the card." Yeah. Depois a gente vai, depois que o curso continuar, a gente vai continuar nessa sala ou a gente vai para outra? Para o departamento, né? Tá, porque aí depois tem que passar essa notícia para eles. Bom, gente, então para preservar o horário e para nós aproveitarmos o máximo possível a presença do professor, porque também o evento é transmitido, então pode ser que existam pessoas que estejam no horário fora daqui, então a gente vai iniciar.
Okay, thank you. So, what I want to do today, the last day, with you is to talk about more about flexicurity and also talk about social security and these topics, and also about some other developments in my country which might be of interest. And in the end of the course, I will try or will invite you and me to try to compare what I have told you with the situation in this country. And so then I depend more on what you are saying about it. But also to see, I might have shown you then a wonderful world. And is this wonderful world, well, it's not wonderful, but I would say it looks better than here. And would it be possible to copy all the rules, all the ideas we had back home, or not? I think it's important because there's a big danger that if you copy just certain rules to another country, they might not work. And my own experiences, I have long experiences with consulting work in Eastern Europe and other places in the world. I never sell my own system. I always try to give them to argue and to help them to find their own system, because all the countries are different. And that's why I love to come to Brazil, because it's different. Okay, so let's go now a bit more. We have already talked about flexicurity, and I will go a bit further into detail on flexicurity now. So the idea started in 2007. And the background at that time was challenges of the changing world, globalization. At that time it was globalization. So the question was, should our systems in Europe, we are talking about 28 countries, well, 27 from 1st of November, but 28 countries, and these 28 countries were in a situation of how to deal with globalization. Now, these days, we would say we have the same issue again, because we are now talking about digitalization. The same process, everything changes, the economic had to adjust, and for example, Germany fears that we will be behind because of we didn't follow all the modern technologies fast enough. So we will see. And this means, on the one side, flexibility. On the other side, simply flexibility insofar that the business is more, for the business it's more easy to become competitive on the expense of the other side. Other side, I mean the workers, the employees. This would be one thing. So make, for example, dismissal easier, etc. All these kind of things. So this is one approach. The European Union has started, as I've told you in the other classes, has started with a rather liberal approach, saying the social progress will be automatically the result of economic progress. That was the view of the founding fathers in 1957. 15 years later, they said, well, sorry, that's nonsense. It doesn't work. So the approach by the European Union now is that you should see both sides. And so the question the idea was to call this, what they have thought about, to call this flexicurity, which is an artificial word. And the idea was you give security on the one side for the workers, you give flexibility on the other side, and you try to balance it. You try. I just point out try, because you never can really balance. Because it depends on several factors. I give you some factors to think about. One factor is if you have the employer-employee organizations, and the employee and the employer's organization is far stronger than the other side. I don't have finished the sentence. You can imagine what happens. If it's vice versa, okay, you also may know what happens. The same thing is with I think in a way with every aspect, and you have to see also that business, which is in a way understandable, tries, if they know the rules, they try to put it to the best from their point of view. So as I said yesterday, in Germany, these kind of flexicurity we had in the 2000 in the first decade of the century was well, speeded up the economy, but it lowered the wages in a way. Okay, so this is the world. where you have it, and this world might be less radical in its consequences in Europe than it is here. But also, what you have to see in Europe is, well, I'm coming from the from a country in the middle of it, which was one of the founding countries. But for example, also Romania and Bulgaria belong to the European Union, and the situation there is far, far different from Germany. The wages are far lower. So in Germany, the average income is 3,000 euros, about 3,000 euros, which is about 12,000 reais per month. In Bulgaria and Romania, it's 400 euros, which is just 1,200 or 1,300 reais per month. So there you see the difference. So it's also difficult if you have these kind of plans to make it in the same way as you do it in one country. So you have a lot of different conditions in the country, within the European Union. So, but give it an idea, and it was a try to do it, and it's still now in discussion. And the basic of this flexicurity idea, it was an idea not for somebody, but of the European Commission. And the European Commission is a government where there are commissioners, and each country has one commissioner. And so you can see that this commission, then, because they are all of different parties, left, right, or whatever, so that this is a general view of beyond the parties in a way. And so what I found was individuals increasingly need employment security rather than job security. The idea behind this is, well, it's a European thing. We may discuss it if it is here in Brazil. It means that you face a situation that other than me and you, we have lifetime jobs with the same employer. You with the USP, and I with the University of Münster. This is not the rule anymore, at least in Europe, in economy, because people change jobs relatively often. Okay, and so what they found there was that said the individuals increasingly need employment security, so staying in employment rather than the same job. So the concern related to outsourcing, and relocation and increase in income inequalities and gaps between skilled and unskilled workers. You know it here as well. Lifetime jobs with the same employer are a thing of the past. The majority of workers, at least to the polls at that time, endorsed more flexible work contracts to encourage job creation. So the idea is if you are more flexible, there are more jobs. Yesterday I showed you that it might have an effect. But it's, in a way, a dangerous approach. Because if you make it flexible, you may create more jobs. But you may create unsecure jobs, and you may also, it may not work. So it's not sure that it will work this way. So, but this is the background. I said, well, we have a changing world, so we have to adjust to this changing world. And in order to do this, the idea was 4 components of the flexicurity thing. The first component is flexible and retirement contractual arrangements through modern labor laws, collective agreements, and work organization, which is also our Works Council. I will cover it later. So what we have is flexible but also reliable. That's the idea. So, in case of strict protection, there is a reduction in dismissals. But the disadvantage is less entry from unemployment into work. High dismissal costs, so you cannot, it's dangerous to dismiss a person. We have seen it with enterprise reasons. You have to pay a lot in order to achieve this. And women are more affected, disaffected in a way, so negatively affected, than men, because if they seek to combine working and family life, means they have times out. And then to get into this strict system is difficult. So, and then the next thing is, which is a problematic thing, I have to say, comprehensive lifelong learning, which is a good idea to learn your life, during your life. People anyway in a bit more qualified jobs have to learn on the job. And strategies to ensure the continual adaptability and employability of workers, particularly the most vulnerable. This is a great idea to do this, because skills are necessary, so it's for sure that you should do it, but it's difficult to find the right education. What do you really need? But they found that there could be more investment in training, and this is again good. The problems we have with the training on the job, especially in Germany, we have the case. In Germany, we have a considerable number of small enterprises. And these small enterprises, they do a good job in educating and training young people into jobs. And so they do it so well, they would like to have them afterwards. But other companies, even for example, the bigger companies, say, okay, thank you, and they take them. So so we have some enterprises, small enterprises, well, we don't do any training anymore, because if we do training, we spend lots of money on training. In the end, the bigger companies pay better and they are gone. So this kind of conflict. And they asked also for more involvement of governments and social partners. But this lifelong learning is a good idea. How to do it in practice is very, very difficult. Two components. One is in what direction, what skills do we need in the future. Now with digitalization, nobody knows. Tell the people only how this thing works. Is it digitalization? You do not know what will happen there. Okay, and so now we are going more into the details of, let's say, labor law. And active labor market policy. Yesterday I've shown you how Germany is doing this, which this might not always be perfect, and we have seen why this is not always perfect. But the idea to have this effective labor market policy is good, but on the other hand, taking it to this country, it's also expensive. And you do not know if the investment the unemployment insurance system is doing is worth the money in the end. It's generally worth, but may not work. So unemployment benefits are good to offset negative income consequences during job transfers. So you switch from the one job to the other, you do not find immediately another, then it's good to have relatively good unemployment benefits, okay? But the danger is, if they are too good, people say, okay, good time off, I don't have to work, and I have a decent income nevertheless. So maybe negative incentives. And so you have to find some activation strategy how to get the people into this right direction. And there I already will give you two examples, very short. France, as an example to this, has very strict employment rules, and so it's difficult to get back into employment. It's France. Denmark has less strict rules, and it's easier. So Denmark seems to be, in a number of respects, a good blueprint, or good ideas, a good example, but I'm always a bit skeptical about these examples. I know the Denmark example from different areas, from health insurance, from pensions, etc., and everywhere they are kind of good, interesting. But what you have to see is this is a country of about 10 million people. So less than the population of Sao Paulo. And so it's easier to run such a country with a stable economy than other countries. So it's easier also to have more simple systems. In my country already, it's far more difficult to have simple systems. So, and now also modern social security systems that provide adequate income support, encourage employment, and facilitate labor market policy. So, means coverage of social protection provision, unemployment benefits, for sure, but not only, but also pensions and health care. So you might say, well, unemployment insurance is enough. No, it isn't. People also have to see in the end, I have a decent pension. This is necessary for this. And also to have a good health care. And also provisions that help people combine work with private and family responsibility. So what about childcare? You have not always, especially in my country and here I think in in certain parts as well, you cannot trust on the family, on the grandparents for childcare. In my country it's almost over. So my wife, she has a grandchild, but this grandchild is living 400 kilometers away. So no care for the grandchild. It's not possible. So I think this is important also to see. This might look like an ideal world to think about childcare. Maybe in this country you are far away from already thinking about childcare. We have to discuss it. But I show you how Europe tries to do it. And I assume, I mentioned Romania and Bulgaria, that in Romania and Bulgaria said, oh, good idea. But in our country, we still believe that the family is good, and we don't have these facilities to do it, or this money to do it. So, again, here I have to mention Denmark and the other Nordic countries. Nordic countries means Finland, Sweden, and also Norway, which is not a member of the European Union, but very involved in the system of the EU. So the idea of flexicurity is it's not necessarily a conflict between flexibility and high standards of social protection. You have to like it, you have to want it. It's possible, at least in my country. So I give you some national examples. Germany we have talked about enough. Now, and you see, they are not always totally in accordance with the with this flexicurity idea, any country, and this is also said by the Commission, any country should find its own way there. So start with the example of Austria. Well, Austria is again a small country with, I think, the population of Sao Paulo. So you always have to see the dimensions. They have a high labor market flexibility. They have average level of social benefits, not too high. They have an effective labor market policies, obviously. They have a strong reliance on social partnership. So social partnership means that trade unions and employers do not confront only, but try to cooperate. And this is done in Austria. They have even some work chambers, you call them. These work chambers are where both sides meet. And they have a relatively low level of unemployment protection. So the result, at least reviewed by the Commission, was low unemployment, low at risk of poverty rate. So it works somehow. But can all this be transferred to any member state? Would the Nordic system work in Germany, in Spain, in France, and you might add in Brazil? Let's continue. The Danish system. The Danish system is called the Danish Golden Triangle. Great word, right? Golden Triangle. Okay, okay. What they are doing is they have more flexible contractual arrangements, so it's easier to dismiss people. But on the other hand, they have a very generous social security and welfare schemes. So if something happens, you do not really fall into a gap, into a hole. And they have really extensive active labor market policies. So when you're close to unemployment, say, oh, come here. And they do everything to bring you back to work as soon as possible. Again, here, this is a special situation of a special small country with a very special economy. This economy is consisting of a lot of maritime things, because these are a couple of islands, and also of some industry and commerce. That's the main industry. So activation policies are there, and they did shorten the benefit period. Simply say you have to do it faster. So they put pressure on the people. Okay. Pressure on the people to get back. The problem is here that this requires considerable resources, this kind of approach. And what you have to see is that the Scandinavian countries, all of them have terribly high tax rates. So these tax rates are so high. I heard from some managers of Scandinavian companies. One of them, he was asked to, he was in the second, he was representative, I think, in Germany. High-level position, but the representative in Germany. And they wanted to make him the CEO. And this guy said, I won't accept it, because when I will be the CEO in Stockholm, I will have an uprise in my salary of 20%, but the net wages will be simply the same because of the higher tax rate. So it's an expensive thing that you have to see. So I think it's not a model for a country where the resources are there, here, but where it's difficult to charge high taxes. So the Netherlands, Netherlands, and just another story. Well, again, I'm always talking about countries. Well, Netherlands has more population than Sao Paulo. It's 17 million, so a bit more. And huh? Almost the same as Sao Paulo. Okay. The problem, they put it under the heading of the Wassenaar Agreement. Again, here in the Netherlands, you have an atmosphere of employers' association and trade unions, relatively peaceful, work with other. And so the Wassenaar Agreement is an agreement between them under participation by the government. So it's another tradition also here. So the basis of the Wassenaar Agreement was the background, inflexibility of labor market, strong dismissal protection, difficulties to ease the strong employment protection, because the trade unions said, because most of the members had a good agreement. They didn't want to liberalize this. And so there was an evasion, like in Germany, towards temporary and fixed-term contracts, like in Germany. And what they did in the Netherlands, it's also flexicurity in this way. So this agreement now limited the consecutive use of fixed-term contracts and said, if you have fixed-term contracts, only 3, like in Germany, only 3 after the other without reasons. And eliminating obstacles for temporary agencies, they made it easier on the one side, but they put the contracts, fixed-term contract and temporary agency contracts, in the labor code, so they fixed them there, made more rules, and introduced minimum protection and payment. So set basic rules to equalize, to make it as protection like these other jobs. So this is an example in the Netherlands. So again here, Spain used another approach. High share of fixed-term contracts, because they have strong protection in Spain. In Spain, it was even one Spanish colleague once told me, in Spain it's easier to get a divorce, though it's a Catholic country, than to fire somebody. Because at one time you needed a decision by the court. So like a divorce, you need a decision. And so if you end a contract, you need a decision by the court. And it makes it impossible almost. And so this then led to a lot of fixed-term contracts. So they tried to get it back. And if a certain number of fixed-term contracts exceeded, the fixed-term contract becomes an open-ended contract, like in Germany. So these are examples. You see, it's not flexicurity does not exactly mean you have to follow the blueprint of the 4 components, but it shows how countries deal with it. And yesterday we have seen how Germany is dealing with it. Yeah. Sure.
Gente, eu pedi ao professor para viabilizar a vocês a possibilidade de perguntar alguma coisa, porque agora ele entrou em todos os países, então se vocês tiverem alguma dúvida específica, que ele vai voltar para estar centrando mais na Alemanha, mas se tiverem alguma dúvida, ele está à disposição para vocês, enfim, responder alguma coisa sobre algum dos países. Alguém gostaria de fazer alguma pergunta, uma intervenção? Senão ele vai continuar aqui, mas é porque é o momento em que ele abriu para todos os países, já tinha aberto para a comunidade europeia, e agora, como ele está sempre tomando a Alemanha como o centro da investigação, gostaria de saber se vocês têm mais alguma pergunta, não? In Germany, here we heard something about these contracts in short periods. You stay there in the price 3 hours, 4 hours.
Yeah.
It's,
Part-time.
but part-time, not just part-time. It's kind of you say to the employee, come here and work 3 hours from Tuesday to Sunday, and etc. Is and they said us that it is rare, seldom, difficult to happen in Spain. Do you know something about this kind of contracts in Spain? Intermittent, we call.
Well, I assume, I do not know exactly about Spain now, but I assume it's about contracts where you ask people. Basically, you tell the people, I might give you a call, and then you show up. These cases.
Yes.
Um, so,
0 hour. It's a kind of contract. It's called 0 hour. Do you know something about
yeah, well, I think we're talking about the same thing. This means, in general, what you are asking is these are contracts where you, in principle, you do not work in the beginning, but where the employer says, "I might pick you," right? That's what you mean. I might pick you, and so you sit at home.
Yes,
You say,
now I need you.
but you're waiting. You cannot do anything else, right? You're waiting that he will give you a call here and say, "Show up, please show up." Uh, there are rules. I know the rules, and I think they even partly based on European Union law, which mean that in those cases, at least I know the exact thing from Germany. If it's EU law, the EU law says what the countries have to do, and the countries are free to do at least this, but maybe a bit more. And so I just explain how it is in Germany, because I don't know exactly in Spain. And in Germany, when you make such a contract, the employer has to pay you 20 hours a week. So he has to pay you for the work. So in the end, you may be paid for 40 hours if it's a busy week. But if he doesn't call you, he has to pay you for 20 hours. Okay? And because for me it's an idea which totally makes sense, because you spend your time, you do not earn other money, you cannot, because you have to be prepared for work, and if you say, oh, sorry, no, you have to live from something, and you prepare yourself to work, and that's why these rules, at least in Germany, say 20 hours to be paid, even if you haven't worked.
Is there any kind of common rule about this in the EU?
I know that this is at least this is in an act in Germany, which is based on European Union law. And so I would have to look after if this, how much is this in the European Union law? Is it simply that I have to look into into the directive, but I don't have them in mind. Okay, but this is one rule. Okay. Yeah.
Alguma pergunta mais?
Well, maybe. It's interesting to say something about the backgrounds here, because you have to have seen. I was talking about Wassenaar agreements. The important to know is we have the European Union talks about social dialogue between employers and trade unions. But still, the tradition within the countries on trade unions and the relation between both sides are different, very much so. In France, there are very active trade unions. In Spain, a bit similar. In the Netherlands, they are effective but peaceful. In Switzerland, for example, they are even more peaceful. They don't strike, but they have found a way, nevertheless, to push the other side to high salaries. It works. And in Germany, we have, other than, for example, in France, you have 3 trade union movements, and Force Ouvrière and the other 2. And they compete always. And in Germany, you have only one. And this is also because, and then you understand something about Germany, after the Second World War, Germany was a very, very poor country because Hitler destroyed his own country. So the idea was, now start again, and the best is we do it together. So there was a kind of, we just do it together atmosphere at that time. All people were poor, all started with 40 Deutschmarks in the beginning, and some got rich, sure, but it was another idea at that time. And that's why we have a tradition of more of cooperation. And so this is important to see, to understand some of the countries. So now some criticism on flexicurity. If you see the polls they asked people about flexicurity, it was more endorsed by business. So business found it usually good. You may draw your conclusion from this. Trade unions not generally against it, but less enthusiastic. And they made certain points. Less workers' rights, maybe. Compensation by labor market policies, that's one of the points, cannot be taken for granted. It might not work. German workfare program we had is only of limited results. So the people who are on the list of the means-tested benefit, yesterday I explained, they usually have no chance to get out. Lifelong learning may not reach everybody. So the question mark I have is maybe it's a too idealistic view, but at least it shows a trend. Is the traditional lifelong employment really a thing of the past? I don't know. This is the thesis. Is the development really unavoidable? Maybe we'll find a couple of years that it's not true. Atypical, sorry for this word, atypical word, becomes typical and vice versa. do we have more precarious work because of this? There are some studies who did not prove it but suggested. So it's difficult to prove. So there are studies I read also which said we may have more precarious work from this kind of flexicurity. So, if you again go into the area a bit, and by this I want to do it, certain models in Europe. And we call it the Mediterranean model, which means Italy, Spain, and Greece. Well, Portugal also might be in it, but this is not focused on these. We will see, but Portugal belongs to another group. We'll see later. So, in the Mediterranean model, social expenditures are focused on retirement benefits. Because if you see these countries, in Italy, I know, and also in Spain and Greece, they have rather generous old age benefits. Greece had troubles with this during the crisis when they had to fight with the rest other member states of the European Union because of they were close to bankruptcy. They have a strong employment protection in these countries. That's also a problem, has been especially a problem of Greece, but also of Italy to a certain extent. And Spain, we have already seen how it tried to solve it, but short-term work. And they have also early retirement, which under the demographic aspects we have now and challenges is not a good idea so much. The conclusion of a study, I quote here, is this kind of approach is inefficient to fight poverty because you leave out the other people. And also inefficient to create jobs. And we have to add, I think, I don't have them in mind here, but for example, youth unemployment is big, I know in Spain, and you may know Italy better. It's high unemployment among the youth, right? Yeah. Yeah, you see the reason. At least this would be my theory. Because you have a fixed labor market, you think about retirement benefits. If you're 25, you don't think about retirement. So and so you produce poverty. The continental model, which is France, Germany, and the small country of Luxembourg, strong employment protection, they have retirement benefits, unemployment benefits as well. So these are the industrialized countries in the middle. Good in fighting poverty because of social benefits, bad in creating jobs because they're limited. The Anglo-Saxon model. Portugal is an Anglo-Saxon country. Good news, right? No, it's simply because Portugal is used the Anglo-Saxon approach. That's why it's now an Anglo-Saxon country in this sense here. They have many jobs in the low-income area, which means people have jobs, but with low income, maybe still in poverty, working poor. They have certain incentives, and they have rather limited employment protection. So in these countries, it's easy to fire people. It's the old age retirement benefits, for example, in the UK and Ireland and others, are relatively low, and and then they have rather limited employment protection. Well, conclusion is efficient in creating jobs. In brackets, but what kind of? And bad on fighting or preventing poverty. Because with these jobs in low income area, you have difficulties to fight poverty. Well, it may be also, well, Portugal had in the last years had to suffer from something because due to the financial crisis, they were really in trouble. And so I think this might have to be seen as a consequence of this situation.
We will start now in 10 minutes.
Okay, okay. Mm-hmm. So, and now the Nordic models, again, Netherlands is not a Nordic country, and Austria also not, it's south of Germany. So, but again, a certain model. And this Nordic model is high expenditures on social security. They're really generous there. So we call it also the Nordic welfare state. And including all these countries. But the problem is they have very high taxes, extremely high taxes. And you feel it even as a tourist, if you are there, these countries are very expensive for you. They have lower unemployment protection, flexible. They can do this flexibility because in the end there is a kind of pillow you may fall on. And there are good employment chances because you are flexible also with the workers' contracts. So this system is good in job creation and good in fighting poverty. So it's the Nordic welfare states. So you might say, in Europe, let's go Nordic. But for the other European countries, I would already say, be careful. Do we have enough money, enough tax money, to finance this kind of system? It's a typical situation in these countries, and I know from Sweden, Sweden changed its pension system because of the high taxes, because they couldn't control the taxes anymore, and so they changed the retirement income, the pension system, to save money for the system. So and they did it by asking the people to spend some money also in a private provision. So you see that it has its limits. It sounds great, but it has its limits. And if you transfer this kind of welfare state to a country like Brazil, better not, I think, because there are so many different requirements to do it, which are, I think, not possible in this country. This does not mean that this country is not good or whatever, but it's simply the other conditions. And these conditions work in small countries which have developed this kind of system over a long time. And for the Nordic countries, Sweden, Denmark, Sweden and Finland are of a big size, but with a very small population. So they can do these kind of things better. I never could expect that Germany, which has a strong economy, would do this. We couldn't. You wouldn't. And so it's a good idea. It might be a model, but transfer it to other countries is a very difficult or even dangerous thing. Yeah.
We want to start
Yeah, okay, now.
because we can.
Okay, sure.
Okay.
Okay, okay.
Então vamos dar break e aí daqui a uns 20, 25 minutos nós retornamos, tá bom?
Everyone wants to live in Denmark.
Johanna is moving to Denmark. We'll ask her.
Good idea at first.
Mas aqui na relação com o limite é uma posição vertida, tá? Depois você chega um pouco antes e minimiza aqui para vocês procuram
These are all special countries. Denmark works differently from Germany.
Eu separo, na verdade tá na
Usually,
mensagem tá no
this kind of comparison
de um slide
that is
agora
made
pro outro.
academically and doesn't
Tá na
take in
mensagem
the point of view of the international division of labor. So
deixa eu tirar. Ainda tem
it's not possible to have 200 Denmarks in the world.
tem essa aqui é café?
Yeah.
Let's do. Just a moment. Sorry for the
Yeah. Okay, so some thoughts now about digitalization. The question is, will it lead to unemployment? Then we have the same situation. And it will be, from my point of view, more a challenge of adjustment to the new situation, at least in my country. But what we have to see is that's another issue there, that the forms of employment will change. So in the past, or still now, it's a clear thing. On the one side, there are the employees, and on the other side, there are the self-employed. And the employees are covered by labor law, by social security law, and the self-employed usually not. If you see now the situation where this new technology, and also if you see already how it works, the people switch from self-employment to employment, and in some cases it's very, very difficult to fix if it's employment or if it's non-employment. You can talk about Uber. Is Uber employment? I would say yes, but you may have doubts. To work on a platform with a platform's economy, I doubt. Shared economy especially is very difficult to fix. And so this might lead to systems where you cover all the employed, all the people who just work and make income from work. So there are also other new forms of work where you have the same problem. I don't know if you ever heard about Scrum, what Scrum is. I have to confess, I also did not hear it about this just about half a year ago, because I'm leading a course system in labor law in Münster, and there it came up as topic. These are, I will put it generally, these are new kinds of work which leave the old system of work of one company does this, one company does this, one department does this, one department does this. But it's more that the people working in projects. So they are no longer integrated in companies, but they may come from different companies within a group of companies for certain purposes. This makes things, this needs a certain flexibility, makes things also change between employment and self-employed, and so I think we have to face these new forms of work as well. The same is a matrix organization, which is popular in Europe, and matrix organization means you usually have a company where people work, where there is on top is an institution or a company, and there's a group of companies, and all these do their work. And again, like the Scrum I have described, matrix would mean you forget about this structure, the old structure, and you work together by using expertise from different parts. Again, here you have to adjust the flexibilization. You have to adjust the systems of work protection to these new developments. So let's go a bit to social security law and flexibilization. After this, I want to cover the collective labor law and works council, and then we should have time to discuss if it can be compared and transferred, copied, or whatever to this country. Let's talk about flexibilization and social security. Different aspects. What about a flexible economy and high costs of labor? Is that something which does not fit together? I would not say so. I would not say so. The most important thing is the flexibility to a certain extent with protection, and high costs of labor is a matter of what kind of work you're doing. So take the example of my country. Germany is, after China, number 2 in exports. But if you come to Germany, you will find out that Germany is a very expensive country. And then we have high costs of labor. But obviously this works. And it means that then you have to be competitive in another way. It's not just the costs always. And so the other thing is coverage by Social Security, yes. The employees must, from my point of view, be covered by Social Security measures, not only during, but also after the period of gainful employment, since the societal acceptance of more flexibility depends upon expansion of the Social Security system, because should see not only that it's good for certain kinds of business, but it also has to be accepted by the general public, at least in democracies. So, generally say Social Security, I want to say here, is the system of labor law. Very linked together, and your institute here and my chair ahead are always labor law and Social Security law, because it's one world. It's one world. And if you take a comparative view, you will not have any modern society which has just labor law and not Social Security law. And the more modern these societies are, they have always a combination of labor law and Social Security law. Social Security law also because Social Security was founded when the old social systems did not work anymore, family, etc. And so we need both. On the other side, which I already have covered, is improving the economy. Just focus on the economy, and you will have wealth for everybody, and then for social progress. I think I have showed by the European example that this is wrong. It doesn't work. Because it's always, the entire system is a kind of fight, a kind of balance, fight for balance. And so the one cannot exist without the other. So this means, for Social Security now, I do not want to cover Social Security too much here, because Social Security flexibilization is not the major issue. It's important, but not the details are important here. So you need a flexible unemployment insurance, but not only unemployment insurance, but also fair health insurance, providing adequate health service, replacing income, this is very important, when unable to work due to illness. For flexibilization in the system of security, you need also this in case of illness. Also you need a fair pension insurance or pension provision. It has not to be necessarily insurance. In my country it is, in this country it also still is insurance. Replacing income when permanently unable to work, because flexibility with the security aspect can only work when you have an alternative in case you're out of the work. And you can be out of the work because you're dismissed, or you can be out of the work because you're unable to work because of health reasons. And if it's just for a week because you broke something, or if it's forever because you are disabled, you need this in this system. And very important also, but not to be found in any system, from my point of view, is rehabilitation measures. Rehabilitation measures means that people who are unable to work due to certain diseases, and you can bring them back into business, into employment. You should do this. This is worth the money. So train them to other jobs, give them medical assistance to get back, etc. I think this is important as well. Nevertheless, I think we should discuss about high costs of labor, because a number of countries, European countries such as Germany, have high labor costs, and we are sure in my country, the discussion is, it should not be more than now. Because yesterday I told you half of the salary goes to Social Security and taxes. And so it's burden of the people, not only of the business. Both have to. And you have to pay it also when you buy some good, because you pay this as well. Is this a reason for flexibilization? And what could flexibilization in social security mean? Well, the most simple approach is cutting benefits. It doesn't sound as if it would be a flexibilization thing. And cutting benefits only if you have benefits which may not be necessary anymore, or which also sometimes happen in systems that you have people overprotected. So we, for example, had a situation that in public service, for some time, people working in public service were totally eager to retire as early as possible, because after retirement they were all earn more than before, which is there is something wrong. But what you could think about in flexibilization is, and that what we are just, for example, dealing with in Germany, and I'm involved in this considerations here, and using different forms, so to private forms as well as public forms. Is this really flexibility, or does it only put the burden more to one side, maybe the worker? But that's how to be discussed. And using also maybe alternatives forms of financing. There is an interesting idea always in Germany, and this idea we call it the machine tax. Machine tax. It's a very interesting approach. It never worked, but it's an interesting idea. And it comes back again into discussion since we talk about this digitalization. So what does it mean? It means, that I've written down here, is to link contribution, at least in part, to productivity rather than wages paid. What does it mean? Put it that way. You have a company. We take the old days of introducing new technologies, machines. So a machine is replacing 10 people. So the employer only has to buy once this machine, this equipment, worth, let us say, 1 million euros, and then this equipment will work around the clock without a salary, without a break, except because the machine doesn't work anymore. And from 10 workers, you can reduce the workforce to 2, because the 2 have simply to observe if this equipment works right, okay? And so the idea of this machine tax or machine contribution would be, he would pay a contribution for fictitious 10 employees, okay? And because his productivity remains the same. It's a matter of flexibility. And it has been discussed in my country extensively from 20 years ago, and you find it again now here. What do you think about this idea? It sounds progressive, right? But the problem is how to exactly calculate and figure it out, because and it's just a spotlight view. Because later on you have further development, you cannot really measure it. That, I think, is the problem. But the general idea, nevertheless, is there. You might think about alternative ways of financing. Um, you can, for example, other ways increase efficiency on providing in-kind benefits and health insurance. Well, tonight I fly back to Germany and I fly direct to Berlin and I have a meeting there where we have to co-decide on such a thing which has to do with this year. So can we save money by doing things more efficient? Of limited success, we have to be careful here because all the costs will anyway rise because of demographic challenge. Again, who should be covered by Social Security? The regular employment contract, as we have it traditionally, I think here also, only regular employment contract. I don't know. I think also maybe others, because people switch between the systems. If you're somebody who starts working in employment and then works 10 years self-employed, then he gets back to employment, and finally at age 60, 65, he's looking for benefits, pension, and they said, okay, your self-employed years are out. You will receive only a low pension. And so you might extend this, and because the differentiation between self-employed and employed is more and more going away. And so we might cover all self-employed, or the what we call solo self-employed, people without any worker or any employees themselves. And this is a discussion we have now in Germany, but it's very, very complicated, and therefore we are still waiting for a bill or even a paper by the government, because it's very hard work. And also some problems of how to administer it. You also have to improve transfer of rights, etc. So a lot of is the system flexible enough? We have now thinking about a basic pension for the poor. So the poor might get without enough contributions also certain benefit of a certain size. This is not really in accordance with our constitution. That is very much debated now. Also the question of flexible retirement age. It's flexibility. But with this flexible retirement age, you have the problem of that people want to retire earlier. They cannot usually work part-time because our system is not flexible enough, the law. So part-time retirement is a bit difficult. And to be flexible, you also need to cover sabbaticals, for example. An interesting idea, I think it's again Denmark, always Denmark, is because you are here, when I remember right, there is a bill passed by the Senate here in Brasilia on retirement age, right? On retirement age. The retirement age is increasing, right?
It's being established because we nowadays have a retirement age only for public servants.
Okay, okay.
We try to use two ages,
Yeah.
75 to.
Yeah, that's what I mean. There is some discussion here, so what in some European countries they do is because retirement age has something to do with demographics, and what they do, they said we establish an automatism. Automatism means we see the dependency ratio between workers and retirees. And if there are too many retirees, the workers have to work longer.
Here we are trying to use the life expectation
Yeah,
rate.
it's simple. but this is done automatically without intervention by the parliament. It's automatically. So every year you calculate the dependency ratio, and then you might say, okay, half a year more, half a year less.
I know.
So you see a lot of things of flexibility. What would be the right system in Social Security? Also, compared with yours here, Anglo-Saxon model of relatively low benefits, people should care for themselves. It's a different philosophy. In the United States and Britain, it's this way. Germany has another approach, Bismarckian model, mandatory insurance and pensions in relation to income, far more generous, also with Italy and Austria and so on. And the Nordic model means, also an interesting idea, equal basic income for everybody. So if you are in the Netherlands and you live there for a certain time, then you receive, I think it's now 800 euros per month per person. If you're age 60, 65. But they have another additional system. Okay, so what I want to cover now, we have to now to see, because it's the end of the course later on, to meet the time requirement. We still have an hour to go.
Yes.
Okay, and 1 hour, and then we might discuss for
Yes.
15 minutes or so.
Vocês querem perguntar alguma coisa sobre a parte de seguridade? Quer alguma dúvida, alguma questão? Não?
Okay. Okay. So, what I want to here I have written collective bargaining and flexibilization, and works council and flexibility. These two topics have a different reason why I cover it. If you take collective bargaining might be against flexibilization, at least from a certain point of view. And the problem we have is, I'll go into detail a bit later, the problem we have is with collective bargaining that we have we have less and less people organized in trade unions. So the workers' side gets weaker and weaker. And also, the employers more and more try to get out of collective agreements in order to be, and now we have the word again, more flexible. So I will tell you about this. This is one aspect. And the other aspect I want to cover is the special German thing, which in the end of our course for you might explain something. So that's why I want to deal with this here now shortly and try to explain it to you. Quite sorry.
Just a moment, please.
Yes. Something from Berlin. I do it later.
Yes, okay.
So, I'll wait. Later on, sorry for this. It's a call from Berlin. I don't know what about it is. And so... doesn't work. Okay.
Yes.
Don't mind. Don't mind. Sorry. Um, so let's cover these two things now. The trade unions and collective agreements. We have a system of collective agreements, like you here, very likely. And in this system, trade unions and employers do collective agreements. These collective agreements are, like here, about salary amount, about working hours, vacation, and everything. Now the problem is, or the situation is the following. Who is bound by these collective agreements? And there might be changes, differences between here and Brazil, between Germany and Brazil. In principle, bound by such a system are the members of the trade unions. So if you are a member of the trade union, you're bound. If you're not a member of the trade union, you're not bound. But usually, the companies apply these rules also to other workers which are not with the trade union. So you have a situation of a workforce of 200, and half of them are members of the trade union, and you pay all of them the same because you apply this also for the others. The problem there is this also leads to a conclusion by the workers: why should I join the trade union? Because then I pay for the trade union to get more money, and I can save this contribution because I will get it anyway. And this is one of the major problems of collective agreements. And if you talk, this is also interesting, if you talk with specialists from both sides, from trade unions as well as from the employers' associations. I have contacts to both parts. The employers said, well, at least the associations say, we do not like to have weak labor unions because it makes things far more difficult. Because for us it's good to have collective agreements, at least from the point of view as associations. These collective agreements in principle only apply the minimum, so that, for example, the worker can be paid more, so it's only a minimum. Well, I think this is the same here, right?
Yes,
And so I go a bit faster here. In certain cases, the normative effect, so this is applicable for the members, can be extended to non-members by the state. The state has the possibility, but this is difficult to do because the trade unions and the employees association have to agree. There's a certain committee which is doing this all in total. So, what is the problem? The problem is low membership in certain industry, especially in the low-paid industry. And this is a circle which goes down and down and down. So in metal industry, the trade unions are strong. In chemical industry, they are strong. But when it comes to food and these kind of things, it's very weak. And so what you could see is enterprises want to be flexible in a country and try to get out of the collective agreements to make it themselves. Well, the law is made in a way that it is pretty much difficult to do it. So there are legal provisions to make this project to get out of it difficult. but it cannot be stopped. So if you are covered as an employer by collective agreement, you leave, for example, the association, then it is applicable as long as this collective agreement is in place. And that may take years. So it's difficult to get out here. And this, what I said, general applicability is difficult to achieve. What I mean, to fight against this kind of flexibility, because it needs the consent of the social partners. So the question is, what is the future of collective bargaining agreements in my country? So, and this is something you see all over Europe. That there is a problem that the employers try to get out of the collective agreements to make their own agreements, which are not always worse, but very often they are worse, and it's difficult to control it. So the old power of collective agreements to set a certain standard is going. That's the danger we have in our countries. So this is very short about the collective agreements. Let's now move to workers' participation. This is now something very, very special for Germany. And I want to explain it to you a bit more in detail, because this is a question of having a system which is let us say, is it good or bad? So and so also maybe you understand a system of flexibility in Germany better if you know that behind all this is this workers' participation. So we have another tradition. And so I think it's important to explain this. How did this come into effect? Well, it's a kind of funny history. In 1915, 16, 17, 18, 19, that was First World War. This was the Russian Revolution, the October Revolution. This was the end of the First World War for Germany, and Germany lost the First World War. During this time, during this time, in Russia, Soviet Union, the Soviets, and Soviet is council, okay? You know, Soviet means council. These Soviets were established, Soviets of the workers, okay? And these Soviets of the workers, these councils of the workers, did run the companies, the country, did run the country. So they had a hierarchy of Soviets, from the Soviets as a small place to the Soviet in Moscow. This is Russian, so they were in a way a crossroad. The one direction was the crossroad towards the Soviet Union and Russia, and the other was the German street, which went to the other side. And the German street was, we also have these councils. The Russian would call it Soviet. But these councils are now in business, in companies. So the Russian example said the people should be co-decide anywhere. We said, okay, we have a democracy, we do it the other way. But we said kind of democracy also in a plant. And so it was established, this entire system, in 1920. So after the First World War. It was not like now, but it was at least the first steps. And so it was the Works Council Act of 1920, and after the Second World War it has to be re-established because Adolf Hitler didn't like this idea, had to be a leader. So this is what we have now is this co-determination in the plant, on the workplace, and also in the early 50s, and this was brought to us by the British. Very interesting, because at that time we had a strong metal industry which fought 2 wars and nearly won them. And so they said to have this weak idea, and so established also co-determination by workers in the companies themselves, so on the board. So this is, we have both of this we have now. And you might say, well, it makes things terribly long enduring processes of decision, so bad for economy. But in the end, if you ask a German manager in industry, some of them will say, get rid of it. But most of them would say, okay, it's not so bad. It's expensive, we have to pay for it. But we have somebody to talk with. And if you compare it with other countries in Europe, you find they have similar solutions. So I did this kind of teaching for some time in a course on European business law in the Netherlands. There were students from all over Europe. And I asked them, is this kind of problem, issues in the company, dealt with in your country? And the result was mostly, we don't have works council. But what we have, the trade unions, for example, have people within the company. Yes. And so the company needs some person to talk with. If you have 5,000 workers on your plant, you need 1 or 2 or 3 or 10 you can deal with. Otherwise you cannot run the place. So this is the basic thing in a way behind the idea of workers' participation in Germany. And we have these two kinds. One is co-determination on the level of a plant, and we have co-determination on the level of the supervisory board. And supervisory board means really dealing with the issues, the business issues. The co-determination here is limited to, they should not participate in business decisions. No. So no business decisions. So if a company says, we change our mind, and from now on, like I did, I think the first course, I talked about this guy who produced toy tanks, and is now saying, well, I'm a pacifist, so I go to some other things which are a little more peaceful. This decision would be the decision of the company. It has nothing to do with the first co-determination thing. And the second co-determination thing, there it could be a case. Because there they are no board, and if this is a basic decision of the company, the workers could co-decide there as well. But only in big companies, we come to this later. Yeah.
Internal issues.
Yeah.
Problems they have inside.
Yeah, we come to these issues a bit later. So, for example, the employer usually will decide everything which is happening on the plant because he's the employer. He will tell the people where to work. He will tell the people what to do. He will tell the people when to come. So he decides everything. It might be also here. You can limit it by collective agreements, but that's it. The idea of the Works Council now is that certain decisions which do not affect the business decisions, but are central for the people, should be made in cooperation, employer, worker. That's the basic idea behind it. So, for example, what kind of decisions could be affected by this? For example, when should we start working? If you start at 8, 7, 9, or 9:30, it's not a business decision, except you do some work where it's really bound to the time. But usually it's not. You only have to agree. Also, what are the rules for vacation? When can you go for vacation? To set rules and set people with children have the first right to do vacation during the time when the schools are closed in summer, for example. So these are, in a way, what we call, among others, the social aspects. And with the social aspects, the Works Council has a relatively strong right to do something. The other thing is, the question I have put here, should there be an influence of the workers' side in case of dismissal? So the employer wants to dismiss somebody. The Works Council would say, this guy we like very much. He might not be very productive, but for the mood of the people, he's great. And the employer says, well, I have to get rid of him. He's only joking the entire day, not producing something. And so, how to decide this here? Can dismissals be blocked by the Works Council? What about, I have already said, if you have a system, if you have decisions which affect the basic business decisions, so change of production, we would say, no, they could not intervene there. Okay. There's another way maybe to do it. But nevertheless, what about, for example, the company then says, take this example of the tanks and the toys, and said, if we do the other new toys, we only need half of the workforce. So the decision of making, of changing it, and the decision of terminating is a business decision. We have seen it when we talked about dismissal. But then, is this the entire story? No, because this has an effect on the people, and so to deal with this kind of mass termination will be again influenced by the Works Council. So the Works Council cannot question the business decisions, but he can control the consequences. Okay? So the general philosophy is to integrate workers in the decision-making process, but only in the plant, day-to-day works. They should have influence in this case, but basic decisions were set be with the employer. He's deciding about the production, the product, the number of people he is hiring. But the workers should have certain influence in the details. So how is this done now? The first thing is the German translation of the Act is, well, these institutions are works councils. The German word for this act is translated into English, Work Constitution Act. So it's a constitution of the plant. And so this means you have certain rules which avoid, which lead to concluding discussions in all the cases. And so there are some principles. The first thing is these works councils are elected by the workers. So every 4 years they elect a new works council. And this is very important, cooperates with the employer. So there is real kind of cooperation, and as a result of the cooperation, if they don't agree on something, maybe on the working hours, or maybe other issues, they could not go on strike. Strike is not allowed, which sounds strange. But it is not allowed because there are other solutions for the problem. And I'll show you later how these solutions are done. So you call about partnership. In some countries, I don't know how you feel here, you would say it's a strange approach. But it's the approach we have in Germany, and it has history, and it's agreed upon by the trade unions and the employers on the other side as well. So you see here, it sounds like a wonderful world, because it says the employer and the works council, I quote from the Act, shall work together to promote the interests of the employees and the plant in accordance with the valid collective bargaining agreements in the spirit of mutual trust. Sounds great, right? And in cooperation with the trade unions, they do not play a central role, in cooperation only, represented in the plant and the employers' organizations. So that's a basic idea. From a point of view where this system is unknown, it sounds strange, especially the word of mutual trust. But interesting to see, it works. But this also leads us later on to a conclusion. You have to see every country how it works, as the country is. It may not work in any other country, I don't know. So, here, again, what I already said, it shall be impermissible for the employer and the works council to use labor dispute measures against each other. This does not apply to labor disputes between parties component to conclude collective bargaining agreements. So among each other, they are not allowed to. It doesn't matter if the trade unions and employers nevertheless do collective agreements. They also shall refrain from activities which affect the operation or order of the plant. No party politics on the plant, and they should do it in a way of cooperation, not of strikes, lockouts, etc. So the question is, I think you may have the question now, how does this wonderful world work? Okay? So, what are the rights of the Works Council? The Works Council may ask for information. So it has a specific right for information. And information means just that the employer tells them how it is, nothing more. This is in almost all cases, even when it goes to change of production. They have to be informed. They also have to be informed if, For example, this morning I read that a big German bank is closing down out of 1,000 branches, at least 400. Well, this is a business decision. But the Works Council has to know about this business decision and its background information, okay? Right to make recommendations. Well, it's a good idea, but maybe no effect. But now it gets a bit more effective. Right to be heard. And right to be heard means they may give comments. They may be able to influence the decision-making process. And the most important example, I think I have mentioned it already yesterday, is if the employer wants to dismiss somebody, he has to hear the Works Council before. So he cannot just send the dismissal letter to the employee, but he first has to send this to the Works Council, and he has to wait for the comments of the Works Council, or for waiting for a week, when they don't do anything, before he can do this, okay? And word, what does it mean? It says something, it's well, huh? Maybe he doesn't care about it.
Okay.
But if he doesn't hear them, then the dismissal is null and void. And he has to start the process again. So there is an effective sanction there. And if this is done, if it's heard, the law also says if there are certain rules are not followed by the employer, then the Works Council can veto it, can veto the dismissal. And if they finally veto the dismissal, then what happens now? Well, then you go to the labor court. And the labor court then will finally decide if the veto was correct or not. So you see already here a certain influence there. To be consulted means a bit more. Even more is refuse it consent. So they simply have to consent about it. And this is, for example, the case in what you may call the social matters. We call the social matters. So if the employer says, we start working now at 7:30 in the morning, and the Works Council says, because it's difficult, because then there's usually the traffic jam in the city, so it's hard for us to come on time there. So let's start earlier or let's start later, whatever it is. If the Works Council says no to the proposal, he cannot do it. Or, for example, the employer says we need today additional working hours because we have more to do than we expected. He has to ask the Works Council for consent. And if the Works Council says, no additional work, then he cannot do it. If he then still would do it, then the workers can legally refuse to do it. So he says, you do it, the Works Council says no, then he still can try, but the worker can say, no, I won't. So this is a very powerful kind of co-determination, and this is especially the case in matters like certain social affairs, including even social institutions or even pension issues, supplementary pensions. But in supplementary pension, they cannot tell the employer to invest more money because he has a decision on how much, but they can decide where, how you should distribute it in the end. So there's a number of things, also order of the plant, etc., controls to prevent theft and so on. And what is when they do this kind of thing? They agree. When they agree, then they conclude usually a works agreement. And the works agreement is very similar to collective agreement. Has almost the same legal rules, same legal effects. And if they do not agree, what happens now? Strike, not allowed. So how to solve the problem? And this problem is solved by arbitration board. There's an arbitration board consisting of workers' representatives and representatives of the employer, and one independent person, which is very often a labor judge. They do it very often. And they try to find a basic solution, and when they do not do it, then in the end, finally, practically, the labor law, the independent person will decide. But you have a decision. So this is the idea how the Works Council works and makes this system working. Okay? That's what Works Constitution means. There's a constitution where you have for any of those things some solution. And if you really fight, veto and so on, you have either the arbitration board or you, for example, have a decision by a labor court. So you have to go to the labor court. So you never are forced to do a strike. So you have to establish this thing in all establishments under private law, and in the public sector it's a similar system. Exempt are religious communities, churches, etc., but they have their own system of co-determination. This is because of the Weimar Constitution. Also certain establishments serving ideological purposes are exempt to a certain extent. So if you have a newspaper, a right-wing newspaper, and people down who do the printing are left-wing, you might not let them co-decide everything. So there is an exemption. Exempted are also people.
You don't have this council in these places.
No, you have, but their rights are limited.
Okay.
So, for example, the example you always have is they have this Works Council also in the newspaper. But if you, for example, if the employer says this guy is writing crazy things in his column always, I don't like it, and I put him into sports to get rid of his wrong views from a side point of view. Then he would, the Works Council would not have the right to do this because it affects the ideological, the purpose of it. Mm-hmm. If it's about the driver of a car who brings around the newspapers, it's different. Okay, and excluded are the executives, the people who are close to the employer, because it would mix it. Mm-hmm. Works Council elected by all employees, and it might be either one person just in small places, or up to 35 in plants with more than 7,000 employees. So, and the bigger it is, the more you need. And in big plants, these people are also, they do not work. So they're exempted for work, and they are paid according to their former work. And they really can be somehow very powerful. So if you read about Volkswagen, you know all for Volkswagen. And Volkswagen in Wolfsburg, the place where it came from, the second most powerful guy is the head of the Works Council. And so they have really influence. And you have the same on the different levels of a group of company. So it's not no paid job. They can paid leave for training, etc., etc. And all the facilities have to be provided by the employer and to be paid. So this is the list of social methods. I don't want to go into detail here, but you see order in the plant, daily working hours, temporary shortening or more hours, how to pay wages, etc. Okay? And staff matters are questions of hiring, firing. And with hiring, firing, you have seen they can do general rules, for example, general rules, whom to hire, according to what rules. So they might establish hire more women, or hire more refugees, or whatever. They can do it here. And this we already have covered with the dismissal thing. In economic affairs, so we have social affairs, we have staff matters, and we have economic affairs. In economic affairs, we are very, very close to the business decision, okay? And here, there is a kind of information only in the first place, because they cannot co-decide, but they have to be informed. And if the decision is done, and for example, a factory is close to closing, then the employer has to negotiate with the Works Council on the details. Not the details how he closes the factory, but the details, the result, which affect the workers. And so they usually negotiate then some lump sum payments for the workers as a result, or remember yesterday when we talked about the transfer company. You remember the transfer company? And so the Works Council may say, well, you close down a factory here in an area where there is already unemployment. You have to help the people to get new jobs, either here or in other places. So we ask you, and then they negotiate on it with these works agreements. You have to provide us with a chance to look for jobs by establishing this transfer company. And so then the employer will give money into this transfer company, and on the other side, as I told you yesterday, the employment agency will also put some money in. So there is really influence. And again here, with these amounts here, which are negotiated, in the end, they both have to agree, and if they don't agree, you need an arbitration board again. So, is all this an obstacle for flexibility? So, what would you think? Germany did this approach now for 100 years. During this 100 years, Germany became one of the most successful economies in the world with this. But it's sometimes hard to understand from other countries that it works. So I tell you a kind of joke, anecdote. When I did teaching this in this international European business law course, there was a British student, seemed to be very conservative. And when I talked about Works Council, he sat there in the last row and said, I can't believe it, I can't believe it. So he made the impression, I can't believe that this will work. But obviously it works. The problem is it slows down decision-making process, but it makes relationship more reliable, because then you have an agreement, you have somebody to decide, you can fix something. And this, in the end, especially the established companies, they all have these works council. New startups very often don't have, because sometimes people, the working people there themselves say, well, we don't need it. We talk to the guy and that's it. And there are some companies who refuse it. So, for example, there was an airline which is now bankrupt, which always refused it. So some of them don't want these because they see the problem of less flexibility. And so it's to establish this, you are protected, but it's upon your own initiative. But after all, I think it's a good idea. The other thing is a coordination on the company level. This first thing was established because the British said we have to, your iron and steel industry has to be calmed down somehow. You have to be less powerful. And the second one is the major one now of 1976, which means in supervisory boards of companies with more than 2,000 employees, you need to have the same number of seats for workers and shareholders. So the workers co-decide. The only thing is that in the end, if they don't agree, the chairperson of the supervisory board has the last word. And he is by law always a guy from the employee, from the shareholder side. So in the end, yes. But this also works, but it works a bit less good. So in the last years, you did not hear much about it in a way. And the problem for the trade unions here is something you might understand. In the big companies, the trade unions loved, we have to say, to send the first class people, so the chairperson, etc., to, let us say, supervisory board of Volkswagen or Mercedes. So the number one person were there. But the problem is, if something goes wrong, or if you have to make unpopular decisions, closing down plants, you co-decide. You are responsible for it. And so it's not very popular. And so in some areas there were scandals, and in Volkswagen you had also this kind of scandals, and the persons from the trade unions involved there, they knew it, and so they were involved in the scandals. And they didn't do enough because they either were not experienced enough or they had enough other things to do, so they did not really read all the papers or whatever. And so it didn't work this way. So this is therefore the less important part of it. And the most recent one is that in smaller companies you have 1/3 participation, but at least they have some influence in the decision-making process in the company. So I think this we have mostly covered. Flexibility, internal flexibility within the plant, so to make it there possible. Kind of breathing factory, okay. So now let's come to the end. And I want to include you also because I want to discuss, put some questions in the first place, and in the end I would like to ask if this system would be possible, or what you could learn in Brazil from it, or if you may not learn at all. Well, I would not say may not learn at all, then it wouldn't have make sense to come here, but we'll see. Okay, so start with. Is, for example, the first question I have to resume, flexibility or flexibilization, is it a solution to help the economy? Yes or no? You think?
No.
The question is what you understand by flexibility and flexibilization. If you say just being more flexible, being more easily adjust the workforce to changing business structures, this might help the economy in the first place, the business, but might not help the society and all people participating in the end. Flexibility or flexibilization is an opportunity for workers to harmonize work and the rest of the life, so family life, etc. Yes, because this is a kind of flexibility, just another approach from another point of view. Because flexibility is not as such, it's difficult to should really define what you mean with flexibility, because flexibilization, to have a flexible working hours, is a positive thing. So last year in the metal industry they had a collective agreement on that you can take time off to care for your family, for family members who need care, and you really can opt for it, and that's flexibility. Flexibility or flexibilization might lead to less protection for workers. It's again the question of the sense, how you feel it. Flexibilization as such, if you understand it as I understood it in the first time, would lead to less protection. But if you combine it with some other means, it might be the other way. The other means, then we run up to flexicurity, and we have seen flexicurity is not the perfect solution. It's only an approach. The next point, flexibility or flexibilization will make an economy more successful, and by this will help the workers. I put 2 question marks there, because my clear answer is no. Simply only say more flexibilization will speed up the economy and this will help the people, that's wrong. There are a lot of examples which show that this approach is wrong. In a way you also can see it in Germany, where the wages went down during this time. So this automatism, which was Reaganomics, and which was also in the first place set in the European treaties, this doesn't work. Might there be a balance between the employer side and the employee side? Well, the problem is when it comes to trade unions and employers association, we have to see how powerful they are. And we see in certain areas in my country and generally in other countries, trade unions weakening. Again, is flexicurity a solution? It depends. It depends. And it depends on how you do it. And also, if you try to do it in a perfect way, well, you should not take Denmark always as an example, because this is a small country with special conditions there. You should see that it requires a certain balance, and this balance is not sure. This can, both sides, especially the business side, might like to take the best out of the situation, and so the balance might not be there. So the final question for me is the European approach in general the solution? So it's done in Europe. Europe is doing maybe good. And so you are looking here in this country for a solution. Take the European solution. What do you think? I just sent in the European laws, a list of them. They are also available in Portuguese. And you bring them to Brasilia and they vote for it, okay? Would there be a solution? So should Brazil copy this, what I have done, or showed you? Well, I have to tell you my own experience. I have experience of about more than 20 years of consulting other governments in other countries on social security and pensions, and also labor market policy in some cases. I never proposed to copy my system. Never. Why? Well, what I learned, I visited all the countries because otherwise you cannot do it. What I learned is you have to understand the country and you have to understand the special conditions, the special traditions of the country, etc. So, for example, these cooperating of works of the trade union side and the employer side, which is not always works, but generally it's approach. This approach is how to say, this approach is a typical German one, and you can explain by the history, 1919, and after the war, totally destroyed country. And the idea, the mood, now we will do it together in cooperation, all sides, all Germans start again. You cannot transport to other countries. If you tell the British, you should it the Nordic way, they said, no, we would never do. Because for the Nordics, they have long established welfare countries. The British, like the US Americans, have another approach. They say, well, we serve for the poor, and the rest, the better off, will take care for themselves. And also this, for example, this country is a country with far more social tensions than we ever had. And within these tensions, you cannot put in just these kind of systems we had. I think what I then always did, so my experience in the first place, never just copy something from another country, never. I have some experience, I told you one experience there, where you could really prove it doesn't work. You always have to start from the special conditions of a country and establish something tailored for this country. When I was in one country, it was Northern Macedonia, I also had a problem. And when I flew back the first time, I was asked by one of the people in the plane, what are you doing there? And I said, well, I'm on a mission impossible. because I had no idea how to do it in the first place. But in the end, I found a solution which had nothing to do with the German system. It's on the other way, so it was not useless that I told you everything here, and you may use it. It is good to learn from other countries and to use their experiences. So you see there are approaches of combining flexibility with certain security measures. That's the idea. The details are not the most important thing. But the thing is, you can combine this thing. You could not just say, we need flexibility to help the economy, and do it on the expense of the workers. You do not have to, because you have examples how you can do it in a way that that you do it from both sides. So to know this and to use this approach is a way, in principle, the idea to use also in this country, the idea. So it's good to learn, but establish your own system just on this background. This is what I always did there, and I would simply also suggest it here. And I see I'm almost on time here, but I have still enough time for discussion. And I enjoy teaching here.
Steinmeyer, I would like to say that it was a pleasure to receive you, and we are always learning with you. Thank you very much. And vocês têm alguma pergunta? Gostariam de fazer alguma indagação, fazer alguma intervenção a respeito do que ele falou no final?
Yeah.
You have previously said that it's not allowed for German workers to strike. But if a strike does happen, if it does take place, what legal measures can be adopted against the workers that participated in the strike?
Okay.
Can the Works Council be held accountable and somehow be punished for it?
Well, the first thing is they are still allowed to strike for collective bargaining. So it's only, to make it clear in the first place, it is only that if it is about decisions to be made by the Works Council and the employer. So the other area of wages, they can go on strike. And when they do go on strike on Works Council issues, this would be a breach of the labor contract. So it would in the end might even justify a dismissal on behavioral reasons. So that it could sanction because it violates the law. And we also had cases where the chairperson, an interesting case, where the chairperson of a Works Council used his letterhead and said, in my position as the chairman of the Works Council, I suggest that you take part in the strike, not within the company, but in the strike on a collective agreement between my trade union and the employers, because then he misused his position, his kind of independent position of the Works Council, to say, well, I'm an important person, I'm an independent person, and I say go on strike. And in those cases, you even can dismiss him from his position.
Não fica assustada, não, sabe por quê? Porque depois a gente vai trabalhar com todos esses. Bom, você não está no curso, mas você está convidada a comparecer. A gente vai usar o nosso referencial e esse modelo da Alemanha é o modelo ideal para a gente trabalhar com o Bernard Neumann, com a legalização da classe operária. Assim, é muito bom para a gente entender o processo. Então, na hora que nós formos trabalhar com os nossos referenciais, o que o professor nos ofereceu será devidamente desconstruído à luz do referencial teórico que nós vamos usar. Sim, né? Eu já falei isso para ele, mas eu me sinto confortável porque ele não vai poder estar com a gente, mas ele sabe que nós vamos desconstruir todo esse modelo, tirar os pedacinhos, mostrar todos os elementos da questão da forma jurídica e tudo mais, tá bom? Mas realmente o mundo está ficando um lugar difícil. A vontade de pare o mundo, eu quero descer, né? Porque tá vendo, são modelos, né? Falem.
Queria saber como que se dá a relação entre esses conselhos operários dos diferentes países. Vamos supor, numa hora que na hipótese de uma Volkswagen fechar uma fábrica em Portugal, como se dá essa relação entre eles?
He wants to know how it happens when Volkswagen from Portugal close and make some emissions. Is it possible to Volkswagen council in Germany do something? How do it works when there is an enterprise, German enterprise that has place in
Other countries.
Eu usei só o exemplo da Alemanha porque ele falou que os outros países não têm o conselho, então não é coisas entre conselhos, mas uma empresa que tem essa.
Well, the German Works Council law only applies to plants within Germany. So the only exception is if you are on a mission to another country, then you are still affected by it. So, but if you, for example, if it's a branch of a German company, here in Brazil, for example, there would be no Works Council here. But on the other hand, a foreign company operating in Germany and having a plant in Germany, they might have a Works Council.
Mais alguma pergunta? Deixa eu só lembrar algumas coisas passar aqui. Passa. Eu e o Flávio vamos iniciar o curso no segundo bloco lá no departamento. Começará às 8 horas, será entre 8 e meio-dia. A gente é bem criterioso quanto ao tempo. Esse tempo a gente diminuiu um pouco mais para poupar a saúde do professor, mas a gente começa às 8 e termina ao meio-dia. Aí tem duas partes. Assinem na parte final, no final, porque tem a presença da primeira e da segunda parte. E a semana que vem vocês já terão que fazer a pergunta referente a esse texto para a segunda parte da aula, né? Então, também estejam preparados para isso. E aí a gente vai fazer o uso do material que o professor nos legou. Nós vamos ter uma quantidade de aulas para explicar o método, e aí depois a gente vai voltar para debater com o material dele e com a situação brasileira, tá? Mas usando o método. Então a gente precisa de algumas aulas sobre o método, e aí a gente aplica à Europa e ao Brasil, tá bom? Então é isso. Então estão dispensados.